They loved the version of you that bent, like light through glass, shaped by their expectations, softened by silence. You made yourself small to keep the peace. You fractured to be loved. But the day you spoke with your true voice, not the voice that agreed, not the one that made them comfortable, something in them pulled away. Because some people don't leave because you changed. They leave because you stopped performing. Carl Jung called this individuation the sacred, often painful process of becoming whole. And wholeness threatens those who only ever embraced your fragments. So the real question is not, why did they leave? The real question is, what part of you finally came alive when they did? There's a distinct ache when you realize that your love was not truly seen, only your usefulness, not your soul, not your wild heart, but your ability to soothe, accommodate, and absorb. You remember it, don't you? That one moment, quiet, almost forgettable, where you finally said something real, not cruel, not loud, just true. And everything began to unravel. The shift was subtle. A look, a silence, a withdrawal. And though their mouth said, "I love you," their presence began to say, "Not like this." That was the moment you stopped performing. Not out of rebellion, not to hurt them, but because your skin could no longer contain the lie you were wearing like a second body. And in return, you watched someone you loved, perhaps more than yourself, begin to turn away. Not because you had changed, but because you had revealed. So much of what we once called love was really a system, an unspoken contract. I will keep hiding my truth if you keep pretending to love me for it. It was never spoken, but your nervous system signed it. Your inner child signed it. The you who learned early that love was earned, not received, signed it. That's the version of you they grew attached to. The soft you, the quiet you, the you who felt everything, but spoke almost nothing. And so, when you stopped folding, when your needs stopped apologizing for existing, when your presence no longer came with disclaimers and averted eyes, they didn't recognize you, because for them, love had always meant, you remain who I need you to be, no matter what you really are. To come home to yourself is an act of courage, but courage is lonely at first. Jung called this the individuation process. Not some self-help cliche, but a dangerous, vital undertaking, because when you choose wholeness, you risk everything that was built on your fragmentation. Relationships, built on silence, fall apart in the presence of your truth. Dynamics built on emotional servitude deteriorate the moment you say, "I matter too." You didn't betray anyone by becoming yourself. You simply stopped betraying yourself to keep others comfortable. And in that moment, that trembling sacred threshold, you lost the version of love that needed your disappearance to survive. But what you gained was the first breath of a life where your soul is no longer negotiable. They called it love, but only when you were quiet, only when you swallowed your intuition, softened your anger, and wore your pain like perfume. You were the calm in their storm because you dared not bring your own thunder. You were the stillness they admired, not realizing it came from holding your breath for too long. And somewhere along the way, your silence became the foundation of their comfort. It wasn't asked for, at least not directly, but it was expected, like a tax on your presence, unspoken but always felt, and you paid it willingly, because in the past, silence had been your currency for survival. You learned that stillness kept the peace, that softness made you lovable, that needs were dangerous. So you buried them under devotion. You thought, if I love them enough, they'll finally feel safe enough to love me back. But the truth is harder. Some people don't want to meet you in your depth. They want to float on the surface of who you appear to be. They want your affection without your depth, your attention without your boundaries, your loyalty without your truth. They mistook your silence for serenity. They mistook your accommodating nature for peace. But you weren't at peace. You were disappearing in slow motion and calling it connection. They never asked you to shrink. But they did nothing when you did. They praised your patience but ignored your exhaustion. They loved the version of you that didn't make them uncomfortable, the version that didn't reflect anything back to them about their own fears, limitations, or wounds. You became their mirror, yes, but only the kind that flatters, never challenges. And here is the brutal tenderness of it all. What they called love only worked when you weren't fully alive. The moment you spoke, they heard criticism. The moment you cried, they saw instability. The moment you set a boundary, they felt punished. Because for them, your silence wasn't absence. It was loyalty. Your repression wasn't pain. It was politeness. Your disappearance wasn't tragedy. It was comfort. They loved your silence because it meant they never had to look at themselves. And when you finally whispered your truth, when you finally showed them the cost of your loyalty, they turned their back, not out of cruelty but out of incapacity. They were never equipped to love someone whole, only someone compliant, only someone who didn't disrupt the illusion of safety they built out of control, predictability, and silence. But silence is not love. Compliance is not connection. And disappearing to be loved is a slow kind of death. So, let this hurt, let it shatter, let it fall apart. Not because you are unworthy, but because you are finally too true to be sustained by anything false. This is not the end of love. It is the end of being loved for the wrong reasons. And sometimes, that is the beginning of everything. They say they want you to grow, until your growth no longer flatters their reflection, until your wholeness begins to illuminate what they've denied in themselves, until your voice begins to sound like a mirror, not a melody. The truth is, many cannot hold the weight of your healing. They fell in love with your fracture, not because they are cruel, but because your wound matched theirs. There was familiarity in your pain, comfort in your confusion. They loved you when your brokenness asked for nothing and gave everything. But now you've begun to speak, you've begun to ask, you've begun to see not just them but yourself. And that changes everything. Wholeness is not soft. Wholeness is not agreeable. Wholeness does not bend to keep others comfortable. It sees clearly, it remembers, it asks for truth. And for those who've built connection upon your absence, your return feels like betrayal. They may call you difficult now, too sensitive, too intense. Suddenly you are hard to love when all you've done is become more you, because in truth your wholeness disrupts their equilibrium. Your self-awareness demands theirs. Your refusal to play small invites their discomfort. This is the quiet violence of awakening. You become unbearable to those who only knew how to love your shadow. Not the fullness, not the fire, not the clarity. They never wanted your edges, only your softness. Never your boundaries, only your sacrifice. Never your truth, only your silence. So when you show up as whole, you no longer confirm their unconscious story. That love must be earned. That one must be needed to be kept. That pain is the price of intimacy. Your wholeness says otherwise. It says, I am already worthy. It says, I will not bleed to be held. It says, love that requires my silence is not love. It is survival with lipstick on. And this is the threat. Not you, not your growth, not your love, but the implication that they too are hiding. That they too must look at what they've refused to feel. That the same masks they demanded from you are the ones they wear in their sleep. Wholeness offends the false self because it dares to be free. It dares to live without apology. It dares to ask, who am I? When I no longer need to be palatable, to be loved, and so they leave. Not because you're too much, but because they are still not ready to meet what you've already faced. Your own soul, raw, unfiltered, sovereign. Let them go. Let them misunderstand you. Let them call your clarity cold and your presence too much and your honesty unkind, because the cost of being held by others should never be the abandonment of yourself. This is what Jung meant when he said the process of becoming whole is often met with resistance, not just from the world, but from those who built their love around your fragmentation. You didn't change, you simply emerged. And some people only know how to love a version of you that no longer exists. It is one of the most confusing pains of awakening, that moment when you begin to love yourself enough to stop pretending, and suddenly, the people you held closest begin to disappear. You don't even understand it at first. You think, wasn't this supposed to bring us closer? Shouldn't honesty build intimacy? Shouldn't being real make love deeper? But instead, what you find is distance, withdrawal, silence. And it cuts deeper than betrayal, because it is not loud, not violent. It is the quiet unraveling of a bond you thought was sacred. At first, you tell yourself they're just adjusting. You think maybe you were too sharp, maybe too sudden. You wonder if there's still time to smooth the edges of your becoming. But what you're really doing is mourning the performance. Because when love has been built on a version of you that was never fully true, its collapse will always feel like abandonment, even though it's actually liberation. You didn't lose them. You lost the mask you wore to keep them close, and that mask, that beautifully tragic adaptation, was never just decoration. It was protection, a role you auditioned for as a child, when your nervous system learned that being who you are might be too much for those who were supposed to love you. So you became quiet when you wanted to scream. You became agreeable when your soul said no. You became soft even when your truth was fierce. You made yourself likable, digestible, invisible, and over time, that mask became your second skin. So much so that when it cracked, it wasn't just others who panicked. It was you. Because who are you without it? Who are you when you're no longer managing everyone's perception of you? When your smile isn't currency? When your softness isn't a strategy for survival? The answer is terrifying and holy. You are whole. You are not perfect, but you are real. And realness has a cost. Not because it is wrong, but because most relationships are not built to carry it. We say we want truth, but what many want is comfort dressed as connection. What many call love is really, stay who I need you to be so I can feel okay. And when you stop performing, when you step out of that shape, they no longer know how to hold you. Not because they don't care, but because the love they gave was never meant for your soul, only your shape. And so it ends. Sometimes abruptly, sometimes slowly, like fog receding in the morning. And you mistake the grief for proof that you've made a mistake. But this grief is not proof of failure. It is proof of release. It is the sacred ache of becoming. Because what you are letting go of is not just a person. You are letting go of the part of you who believed you had to earn love by abandoning yourself. And she deserves to rest now. You look around and it feels empty. Your old life no longer fits. Your old patterns no longer soothe. Your old relationships feel tight, like clothes 2 sizes too small. But that's how you know the mask is gone. Not because everything feels easy, but because your peace is no longer tied to their approval. Carl Jung understood this emptiness. He said that individuation, the process of becoming your full, undivided self, often feels like a death. Not of who you are, but of everything you built around your absence. This is not spiritual loneliness. This is sacred solitude. A necessary void that makes space for the life, the love, the clarity that could never reach you while you were still pretending. And if it still hurts, good. Let it. Because the ache you feel is not from losing them. It's from feeling, maybe, for the first time, the full weight of your own existence. And finally, refusing to hand it over in exchange for being liked. You didn't lose them. You lost the version of you who thought love required your silence. and in her place stands someone far more dangerous, someone whole, someone true, someone who will never again perform to be kept. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly become unapologetic. It doesn't come wrapped in confidence or surrounded by people who cheer for your truth. It comes slowly, after loss, after grief, after peeling yourself off the floor. It arrives, in fragments, in the moments where you choose presence over pleasing, truth over tolerance, and depth over performance. Being unapologetic is not about being loud. It is not a performance of power. It is the quiet decision to stop asking for permission to be who you already are. And that quiet power, it's sacred. It is born from the fire of everything that burned when you stopped pretending. You begin to notice it in the smallest places. When you no longer rush to explain your no. When you don't dilute your message to make it more palatable. When someone disapproves and you don't collapse. You're not trying to prove anything anymore. You've exhausted that life. The life where love was currency, silence was safety, and being understood meant being edited. There's a strange peace in the rawness of no longer needing to be liked. Not because you're bitter, but because you're real. You start to see the beauty of your edges, not as liabilities, but as sacred borders. They are not walls. They are doors with locks. And not everyone gets a key just because they want one. When you're unapologetic, you no longer feel the need to shrink your joy to avoid envy, your grief to avoid discomfort, your intelligence to avoid intimidation, your standards to avoid abandonment. You become sovereign, not unreachable, not untouchable, just rooted. Rooted in the truth that your being is no longer up for negotiation. People will call it selfish, too much, cold. They will name your boundaries walls, your clarity arrogance, your distance punishment. But what they're really saying is, your self-respect no longer serves my comfort. Let them say it. Because once you've known the hollow ache of being loved for your silence, you'll never trade your voice again, not even for companionship. Especially not for companionship. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But it is a privilege you must claim. No one gives it to you. You must walk through the loneliness, the detachment, the withdrawal of the familiar. You must become the fire that burns down the false life. And in the ashes, something else begins to grow. Not all at once, but faithfully. A life where your presence no longer requires your erasure. A love that does not fear your wholeness. A solitude that does not feel like exile, but like sanctuary. This is not the kind of empowerment you read on a quote and forget. It's the kind you become when you realize that losing people was never the wound. Losing yourself to keep them was. So you begin to walk differently. You speak with breath in your lungs. You pause before responding, not out of fear, but because your words matter now. You become deliberate, not defensive. Present, not performative. And this stillness, this unapologetic being will confuse many. Because you are no longer trying to earn your space. You are the space. You will outgrow apologies that were never owed. You will lose the need to defend your choices to those committed to misunderstanding them. You will no longer seek closeness with those who only know how to reach for you when you shrink. And the loneliness? It may still come, but now you'll sit with it, not as a punishment, but as a passage, because you are not empty. You are clearing, and in that clearing you will hear it, not from them, not from the echo of their approval, but from inside. You never needed to be more lovable, you just needed to be more you. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you realize you're no longer surviving yourself. You're no longer navigating each interaction like a delicate performance. No longer scanning the room for signs that your truth is too loud, your joy too bright, your sadness too inconvenient. The curtain has fallen, not with applause, but with exhale. And it's in that silence, not the suffocating silence of repression, but the fertile silence of return, that you begin to live the life that was waiting for you all along. A life with no script, no emotional choreography, no need to twist, please, prove, or predict. This new life doesn't feel dramatic. In fact, it's profoundly ordinary. But for someone who spent decades performing, ordinary is revolutionary. You wake up and your body isn't bracing for someone else's disappointment. You sit at the table and your smile isn't hiding 1,000 unsaid things. You speak, not to be accepted, but because your voice belongs to you now. You listen, not to adapt, but to witness. And slowly, gently, the world reshapes itself. The people still clinging to performance fall away like old costumes. Not because you pushed them, but because they can no longer find a version of you that will bend. And in their place, something holy begins to arrive. Real connection, not perfect, but present, not based in need, but in recognition. There are people out there, maybe fewer than you hoped, but more than you feared, who can meet you where you truly are. They don't need you to disappear to feel safe. They don't punish your honesty. They don't mistake your boundaries for rejection. They've done their own burning. They know what it costs to be real. And because of that, their love doesn't ask you to bleed. This is the gift of the life that begins after the performance ends. You are no longer drawn to dynamics that require your diminishment. You stop being magnetized by people who feed off your absence. You're no longer attracted to intensity disguised as intimacy. You stop calling pain passion. You stop calling abandonment fate, because you've met yourself now. And that meeting, raw, humbling, irreversible, becomes the new standard for every other relationship in your life. Not perfection, but mutual presence, mutual responsibility, mutual truth. And in this new landscape, healing isn't a goal, it's a rhythm, a way of walking, a way of listening to yourself with so much tenderness that others either rise to meet it or fall away without resistance. You begin to dream again, not to escape, but to create. Your energy returns. Not all at once, but faithfully. Your body feels like a place you can live in, not escape from, and the world becomes less of a battlefield, more of a mirror. You don't need to be seen by everyone, only by those whose eyes don't punish what they witness. And when the voice of doubt returns, and it will, you no longer obey it. You listen, you breathe, you place a hand on your heart and say, "We don't live in that house anymore. This is your life now." Built not on performance, but on presence. Not on being chosen, but on choosing yourself. Not on being everything to everyone, but being deeply enough for yourself. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of one you finally get to write. In your own voice, in your own language, on a page that no longer requires your erasure to be loved. You didn't lose them. You lost the version of you that believed love required your disappearance, and now, here you are. Not louder, but clearer. Not harder, but more honest. Not invincible, but deeply alive. This is what happens when the performance ends. You stop reaching for love that hurts. You stop proving your worth in spaces that never saw you. You stop betraying your soul for temporary closeness. And in that stillness, you remember, you are not here to be palatable. You are not here to be chosen by those who only love your echo. You are not here to be anything less than whole. You are here to burn clean, to stand rooted in your own truth, to hold your gaze in the mirror without flinching, to know the sound of your own voice and trust it. Yes, you may walk alone for a while. Yes, the loneliness may sting, but it will never be as lonely as a life where you have to abandon yourself to belong. So stay with you, all of you, the soft and the sharp, the light and the shadow, the longing, the rage, the tenderness, the truth. Because the moment you stop apologizing for your wholeness, your life begins to respond in kind. Doors open, weights lift, real ones find you. You are no longer performing. You are becoming. If these words echoed something buried in you, if a part of your truth woke up reading this, subscribe, not to follow, but to remember. Leave a comment. This is your mirror too, and tell me below, What version of yourself did you bury to be loved? And who's finally coming back? You belong here. Not as a role, not as a mask, but as you. Whole, seen, unapologetically home.